No one tells you this when you're younger, but being too kind, too available, it slowly drains you. And the worst part is, you don't even notice it happening until it's too late. I used to think saying yes made me a good person, that keeping quiet kept the peace, that putting others first was love. But now, looking back, I realize what I really needed was this: emotional boundaries. Not to push people away, but to protect what was left of me. And trust me, these 6 are the ones I wish I'd said a long time ago. Let me tell you something I wish I had learned before I turned 40. No, scratch that. Before I turned 30. The word no is a full sentence, but for most of my life I didn't know that. Or maybe I just didn't believe I was allowed to say it. Back then I said yes to everything. Can you take my shift? Yes. Can you babysit the kids tonight? Of course. My husband and I need a weekend away. Can the kids stay with you? Sure, no problem. But it was a problem. I'd be running on 4 hours of sleep, no groceries in the fridge, dishes piled high in the sink, and I'd still say yes, smiling, even when I was tired, even when I was sick, even when I just wanted to sit on my own couch and hear nothing but silence. Why did I keep saying yes? Because deep down I thought saying no meant I was selfish. I thought they'd think I didn't care, that I was cold or worse, not helpful. You know, the kind of label women especially are terrified of earning. Especially women like me. The ones who were raised to please, to smooth things over, to carry the load no one talks about. I remember one time I was literally limping from a pulled muscle in my back. My neighbor called and said, "We're in a bind. Could you walk our dog twice today?" I said yes. I hobbled around that block, gripping the leash and swallowing back tears, pretending everything was fine. They never even knew I was hurting, because I didn't say a word, not even no. And it wasn't just physical exhaustion, it was emotional too. I started noticing I was becoming bitter. I'd smile on the outside, but inside I'd whisper, "Why can't they see I'm overwhelmed?" But how could they? I never gave them a reason to stop asking. I never drew the line, I just kept moving it. Every time I said yes, I erased myself a little. And then one day, I'll never forget it. I was sitting in my car, in the parking lot of a grocery store, crying. Not because of some tragedy, just because someone had texted me, "Hey, we're having a last-minute get-together. Can you bring your famous casserole?" And I felt this wave of resentment, but also guilt, because my first thought was, I don't want to. My second thought was, but I should. That's when it hit me. I was living my life out of obligation, not love. And that's not kindness, that's martyrdom. So I started small. I remember the first time I said no without explaining myself. A family member asked if I could help with a fundraiser. I replied, "I won't be able to." And then I shut my mouth. No reasons, no excuses, no over-apologizing. And guess what? The world didn't end. They said, "Okay." That was it. But internally, oh, my heart was pounding. My palms were sweaty. I replayed that no in my head for hours, thinking maybe I should have added something. But over time, I grew stronger. You see, when you've lived your whole life on everyone else's schedule, when you've been the helper, the fixer, the go-to person, saying no feels like rebellion. But really, it's self-respect. Now I don't say no to be rude. I say it because I've learned I only have so much time, so much energy, so much of me. And every time I say no to something that drains me, I say yes to rest, to peace, to the version of me that's no longer running on fumes. Looking back now, I wish I had learned this sooner, because so much of my anger wasn't at the people who asked. It was at myself, for not setting the boundary in the first place. So if you're listening to this, and your life feels like one long to-do list written by everyone but you, I'm here to tell you, you can say no. You don't need a reason. You don't need a permission slip. You don't even need them to understand. Because no is not rejection. It's redirection, back to yourself. There's something sacred about silence, especially after 60, but I didn't always know that. For most of my life, I treated silence like an empty space that needed filling. Phone calls, background TV, visitors dropping by unannounced, texts at all hours. I let everyone, and everything, interrupt my peace. You know what the worst part was? I thought that was normal. I thought always being available made me a good person. I'd wake up, check my messages before I even got out of bed, reply to voicemails while brushing my teeth. People would knock on my door at 8 a.m. and I'd force a smile, even if I hadn't had coffee yet. But the truth, I was never alone, and still felt completely drained. And one day it hit me. I had no boundaries around my quiet, my space, my time to just be. You see, after a certain age, especially when your kids are grown or you're living alone. People assume you're always free, as if being over 60 means your time no longer belongs to you. But here's the truth no one talks about. Just because I'm home doesn't mean I'm available. It took me years to realize that, to stop feeling guilty for letting the phone go to voicemail, to stop opening the door just because someone rang the bell, to stop explaining why I didn't respond right away. I had to learn that protecting my peace isn't selfish, it's survival. I started setting boundaries like this. I don't answer calls before 10 a.m. I turn off my phone during my evening walk. If it's not urgent, please message me instead of dropping by. Some people didn't like it. One even said, "Wow, you've changed." And I said, "Yes, thank God." Because the old me was burned out. Always on, always giving. Now, I take mornings for myself. I listen to the birds. I read in silence. And I feel more human than I've felt in decades. You know what's funny? People adjusted. When you start respecting your time, others learn to do the same. The ones who don't? They were never thinking of your well-being to begin with. Looking back, I wish I had drawn these lines sooner. I spent too many years mistaking constant connection for closeness. But real connection, it respects boundaries. It gives space. It waits for a reply instead of demanding one. Now, when someone asks, "Are you busy?" I pause. Even if I'm just sipping tea and watching the clouds roll by, I say, "Yes, I'm busy resting." Because peace is a full calendar too. It just looks different than most people expect. Whew, this one took me years to learn. For the longest time, I lived as if every decision I made needed a footnote, not just a reason, a justification. And not for strangers, no, for the people closest to me. I felt like I was on trial for the smallest choices in my own life. Why I didn't want to go to a family dinner. Why I chose to live alone after the divorce. Why I gave up on dating or tried it again. Why I didn't want to lend money. Why I started going to church again. Or stopped. Whatever it was, someone always had a question, a raised eyebrow, a little jab wrapped in concern. And I always had a paragraph ready in my head. I'd ramble on, even when no one asked. I was so scared someone might think something wrong about me. Because deep down, I was taught to be agreeable, to smooth over the tension, to be understood, even at the cost of my own truth. I remember one time, my daughter asked why I didn't come to Thanksgiving that year. And instead of just saying I needed rest, I listed every little excuse. Oh, I wasn't feeling well, the roads were bad. I didn't want to be a bother. You know what that did? It made me sound like I didn't mean it, like I was hiding something, like I wasn't even sure of my own choice. But the truth? I just wanted a quiet day. No chaos, no noise, just me and a book and a cup of something warm. And that's okay. It took me years, and I mean decades, to say this with confidence. I don't owe you an explanation for how I choose to live my life. Let me say that again, for the younger me who needs to hear it. You do not need to explain every decision. You are allowed to do things that others don't understand. You are allowed to want different things. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to say this is best for me, even if no one claps for it. I used to think that if I explained enough, they'd accept it. But some people, they don't want to understand. They want control, or validation, or access to your life that you no longer want to give. And when you stop explaining, oh, they squirm. They accuse you of being distant, cold, secretive. But what they're really saying is, you're not making it easy for me to judge you anymore. And I say good, because I've spent enough of my life handing out permission slips for my happiness. I've built a home in my own skin. I don't need to hand anyone the blueprints. Now when someone says, "Why are you doing that?" I smile, and I say, "Because I want to." That's it. No 3-minute monologue. No pretending I'm unsure. No apologizing for wanting peace or privacy or freedom. Here's what I've learned. The more confident you are in your choices, the fewer explanations you'll feel obligated to give. And those who really love you, they won't need an explanation. They'll see your joy, or your stillness, or your change, and say, "I'm proud of you." If they don't, let them think whatever they need to. Your life isn't a debate, it's a sacred story, and you get to be the one who tells it, or not. You know what's heavier than age? Guilt. But not just any guilt, the kind you carry around for things that were never your fault to begin with. And let me tell you something that took me too long to realize. Not everything you feel responsible for actually is. For years, I wore guilt like a second skin, soft, quiet, invisible to others, but always clinging to me. I blamed myself for my children's choices, for my marriage falling apart, for not being enough for my siblings, for not visiting my parents more often before they passed. I blamed myself for things I didn't say, and things I did say. even when I was just trying to stand up for myself. I'd lie awake at night, replaying conversations from years ago, imagining how I should have handled it differently. Maybe if I'd been more patient, more forgiving, more quiet. But here's the ugly truth no one tells you when you're younger. Some people will let you carry their shame, so they don't have to feel it themselves. And I did, willingly. I took on their disappointment, their silence, their accusations, even when I knew deep down that they were twisting things to protect their own pride. I remember once my youngest told me I'd ruined her childhood because I worked too much. And for years I believed her. I apologized. I cried. I questioned every sacrifice I made. But you know what I never asked? What would have happened if I hadn't worked those long hours? If I hadn't held everything together when her father walked out? If I hadn't paid the bills, kept the lights on, or showed up when she called? She grew up, healthy and educated. She may not remember the late nights I stayed up sewing her Halloween costume, or the quiet way I never ate dinner so she'd have enough. But I do. And that is not guilt. That is love. And love is not something to be ashamed of. I had to stop confusing guilt with responsibility. I had to stop apologizing for choosing myself, especially when no one else would. I had to learn that boundaries also mean not taking the blame for things I didn't break. And listen, letting go of guilt isn't some big one-time decision. It's daily. It's telling yourself, I did the best I could with what I knew at the time, and actually believing it. It's choosing to walk lighter, to stop rehearsing pain, to stop punishing yourself for surviving the best way you could. Sometimes we hold on to guilt because it's familiar, because if we let it go, we'd have to face the loneliness, the grief, the rage underneath. But once I let go of what wasn't mine to carry, I made room for something new. Grace. Grace for the younger version of me. Grace for the woman who tried her hardest with no help. Grace for the mother who cracked but didn't crumble. Grace for the sister who set boundaries and got labeled selfish. Grace for the friend who said no, not because she didn't care, but because she was finally caring for herself. You want the truth? The longer you live, the more regrets you'll collect. But regret is not the same as guilt. Regret says, I would do it differently now. Guilt says, I was wrong back then. And sometimes, you weren't wrong. You were just surviving. And that deserves compassion, not punishment. So today, if you're holding on to something someone else should have owned, set it down. Not because it's forgotten, but because it no longer belongs to you. If any of that hit home, even just one boundary, then maybe it's not too late for you. Maybe this is the sign you've been waiting for. To stop over-explaining, to stop shrinking, to stop carrying guilt that was never yours, and to finally say, this is who I am, and that's enough. If you felt seen in this video, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button so others know they're not alone. Subscribe to Elder Words for more stories, truths, and quiet wisdom we often don't say out loud. And if you have a moment, share one boundary you wish you'd set sooner. Write down there in the comments. I read everyone. You're never too old to choose peace, and I'm glad you're here.